What kind of stories help you fall asleep best? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy these quiet nights, subscribe for more. Now, let your thoughts settle, and we'll begin. It started with the note, folded once, no envelope, no name. Just 4 words in slanted handwriting I didn't recognize at first glance. Returning what was yours. I found it tucked neatly against my doorframe, held there by the wind or perhaps intent. That morning had been gray and soft with rain, the kind that whispers on windows and gives the day a reason to slow down. I had no plans to leave the apartment, no obligations, no meetings, just tea and quiet. But that note changed the shape of the morning. I opened the door, and there it was, a black umbrella, leaning gently against the wall like it remembered the place. My breath caught in my chest, not out of fear, but memory. The wooden handle still curved and polished in the same way, worn smooth where fingers would have curled around it. The fabric taut, intact, slightly darker from the rain, but dignified. Like time had been kind to it. I recognized it instantly. Not just the object, but the story tied to it, so quietly knotted into a part of my past I hadn't touched in over 2 decades. 22 years, I thought, almost out loud. I hadn't seen that umbrella since I was 25. It had disappeared after a spring afternoon that had started with sudden rain and ended with a laugh I hadn't heard since. I brought it inside. It felt heavier than it looked, like it was carrying time. I didn't open it, just leaned it by the door, where umbrellas tend to go, and sat down with the note still in my hand. There was no name, no return address, no sign of who had delivered it, but something in my chest stirred with a certainty that didn't need confirmation. I knew who it was from, or at least who it had to be. The silence in the apartment changed after that. It wasn't emptier, it was expected. Like the room itself had remembered something I hadn't allowed it to speak of. I didn't call anyone, didn't write about it. I just made another cup of tea, sat by the window, and let the rain continue while my mind went gently backward to a bench in a city garden, a short conversation under clouds, and a woman with eyes the color of turning leaves who said, "I'll return it when the timing feels right." I had laughed at the time. I hadn't expected her to mean it. But now, 22 years later, the umbrella was here. And suddenly, so was she not in person, not yet. But in the air, in the memory, in the way the silence now waited. The umbrella stayed by the door for 3 days before I touched it again. Not out of hesitation, but because it felt like something that needed space to arrive properly. Sometimes, when something long lost returns, you don't rush toward it. You let it rest first. On the 4th day, the rain had stopped. The streets were clean, slick in the morning light. I took the umbrella with me, even though the forecast said clear skies. I didn't open it, just carried it like a question I hadn't yet formed. As I walked, everything looked the same but felt slightly tilted. The cafe on the corner still smelled like burnt cinnamon and warm milk. The postman still waved without waiting for a reply, but I noticed more. The details, the way people held their coats, the way the leaves moved across the pavement, like they too were trying to return somewhere. I found myself walking toward the older part of town, not intentionally, just gently drawn. I passed a small bookshop that used to be a florist. I remembered buying her a single daffodil there one afternoon after she had said, casually, that they reminded her of her childhood. I hadn't thought of that moment in years. Now it bloomed again, without effort. The umbrella was warm in my hand, not from sunlight, from familiarity, from memory. I sat on a low stone wall outside the park gates. I hadn't been back here in years. The iron arch still bore the name Glenwood Park, though the paint had faded. I used to meet her here. Not often, not regularly, but enough that the trees had grown to know us. One bench in particular had been ours, not claimed, not marked, but quietly chosen. I walked slowly toward it. No one was there. The bench looked older, but not tired. I sat, placed the umbrella beside me, and waited. I didn't expect her. That's not what this was. I just wanted to listen to the place again, to see if it remembered. I stayed for an hour, maybe longer. The air shifted at some point, the kind of shift you feel more in your skin than your ears. And then, just as I stood to leave, I saw it, tucked gently beneath the bench. Another note, smaller this time, folded once. My name on the front, just my name. I didn't open it there. I didn't need to. I knew the handwriting now. I knew what this meant. She was here, or had been, or would be. And whatever this was, it wasn't over. I waited until I got home to open the note. There was something sacred about it, something that didn't belong to the wind or the city noise. The walk back was quiet, not because the streets were empty, they weren't, but because I had somehow stepped into a kind of stillness that nothing outside could disturb. I laid the umbrella beside the chair, poured a small glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table where the afternoon light came in sideways, soft and forgiving. I opened the note. Inside, 5 words. That was all. You remembered the daffodil. Thank you. My hands didn't tremble. My chest didn't rise quickly. There was no flood of emotion, just a quiet settling, as if something had returned to the exact place it had once left. I folded the note again, slowly, and placed it next to the first one. I didn't need more. Not yet. That evening, I found myself doing things I hadn't done in years. I pulled out an old box from the back of the wardrobe, the one I had labeled Misk, long ago to keep myself from digging too deep. Inside, a few loose photographs, a broken wristwatch, and a page torn from a paperback novel with a sentence underlined twice in blue ink. Some things arrive long after we forget we ever waited for them. I remembered underlining it. I remembered her reading it out loud, leaning against my shoulder in the park, then smiling without comment. She always did that, spoke without explaining, like she knew the words would land when I was ready. And maybe I wasn't ready then, but maybe I was now. I looked at the umbrella again, its shape calm and complete, and thought, how many things do we borrow not knowing they're more than objects? How many moments in our lives are quiet promises we forget we made? I didn't write back. There was no address, no instruction. But something in me understood that this was not a conversation to be rushed. This was rhythm, space, Return? I went back to Glenwood Park the next Tuesday. Same bench. The leaves had shifted slightly in color. No note this time. No figure in the distance. Just the familiar hush of a place that remembered me. And perhaps remembered her too. I sat, umbrella in hand, though the sky was clear, and felt not alone, but accompanied by something that didn't need to be visible to be real. I stayed until the shadows stretched longer across the path, and the breeze turned cooler. Then I whispered into the space beside me, not quite a question, not quite a farewell. I remember more than you think. I hadn't planned to speak to anyone that day. It was just another quiet afternoon, just another visit to the bench. The umbrella, as always, was with me, not out of habit now, but out of quiet respect. Like carrying memory gently in your hand, I arrived earlier than usual. The sky was pale, the kind of pale that made every leaf seem louder in its color. The air had cooled since the week before. Everything around me moved slowly, even the wind. And for a while, it was just me, the bench, and the rhythm of birds somewhere beyond sight. I had closed my eyes for a moment when I heard footsteps, soft but deliberate. Someone was approaching, not hurried, not hesitant. I opened my eyes and saw her. Not the woman I expected, not the woman from 22 years ago, but someone younger, mid-30s maybe. A warm coat, green scarf, book in hand. She stopped a few steps from the bench and looked at me. Not directly, not demandingly, just with familiarity. "Do you mind?" she asked, gesturing toward the other end of the bench. Her voice was calm, low, like someone used to quiet places. I shook my head gently, and she sat. We didn't speak for a while. She opened her book, but I noticed her eyes didn't move. She wasn't reading. She was waiting for something, or someone, or simply letting time pass with intention. I held the umbrella loosely in my lap. After several minutes, she turned slightly. "That's an old one," she said softly, nodding toward it. I glanced down. "It's come a long way," I replied. She smiled. "My mother had one like that. Wore the handle smooth. Said it was the only thing she ever borrowed and meant to return." My heart didn't stop, it paused. Just enough to let something settle. I didn't ask her name. I didn't ask who her mother was. The air between us had shifted not with clarity, but with proximity. "Did she ever return it?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. She tilted her head. "Eventually," she said, "but not to the person who gave it." She said sometimes returning something means placing it where it belongs, not necessarily where it came from. We sat in silence again. She didn't stay long, maybe 20 minutes. When she stood, she looked down at the umbrella once more, then at me. "Thank you," she said, without explanation. And then she walked away, slow and certain, her green scarf moving like a quiet echo. I didn't move for a long time after. The bench was the same, the trees were the same, but the story had shifted. Slightly. Enough. And I thought, some things return through other people, because that's how time keeps its promises. The next time I came to the park, it was raining again. A soft, consistent drizzle, just enough to blur edges and hush the world into something slower. The umbrella opened easily, still sturdy, still familiar in its shape. As I walked, I felt myself moving not just toward a place, but into a memory that was no longer painful. It had softened like fabric that's been handled gently over time. The bench was empty. I sat. No one came. But the air felt full of the last conversation, of the woman in the green scarf, of the possibility that not all stories come back the same way they left. I leaned the umbrella against my leg and looked out at the quiet path that curved between the trees. A couple walked by, sharing a single coat between them. A child in a red jacket ran ahead of someone older, maybe a grandparent, laughing into the fog. And then something caught my eye, just beneath the bench, the exact place where the second note had been a small object, partially tucked into the grass. I leaned down and picked it up carefully. A dry daffodil pressed between two sheets of thin wax paper, held together by a single piece of twine. No message, no signature, just the flower, fragile but intact. It couldn't have been recent. It had been pressed with care, prepared long before today. I held it in my hand and felt something stir in my chest that I hadn't felt in years, not longing, not regret, but a kind of gratitude I didn't know how to name. I didn't need to ask who had left it. Whether it was her or her daughter or someone else entirely, it had been left for me. That much I knew. I stayed on the bench a little longer than usual. The rain didn't bother me. The umbrella shielded just enough, and the daffodil, still between the wax paper, rested in my lap like a whisper made visible. I thought of her again. Not the version from 22 years ago, but the version who had waited this long to return something small, something kind. I wondered how many times she'd walked this same path, how many Tuesdays she had hesitated before turning back, how many days the memory of that umbrella had sat quietly in some corner of her home, asking nothing but to be remembered. That evening, when I returned home, I placed the flower in the old box next to the photograph, the watch, and the page, with the underlined sentence. It no longer felt like a box of remnants. It felt like a story, one still being written. I arrived early that day, not because I was expecting anything, but because something in me wanted to sit a little longer before the day arrived fully. The sky was pale blue, brushed with quiet clouds that seemed to drift without direction. It wasn't raining. The umbrella stayed closed beside me. I had become used to its presence. It no longer felt like an object, more like a companion, a steady shape in the rhythm of these returning Tuesdays. The park was nearly empty. Leaves skittered across the path, chased by a breeze too lazy to carry them far. For a while it was just me and the sound of the city being softly itself. I had just begun to wonder whether this Tuesday would be like the first ones, quiet, solitary, reflective when I saw her. No hesitation, no lingering in the distance. She simply appeared, walking slowly down the path, hands tucked into the sleeves of her coat. She looked older, of course, but not unfamiliar. The kind of older that time shapes gently, eyes the same, shoulders softer, hair streaked with calm. She didn't rush. She didn't pretend not to see me. She simply walked straight to the bench and stood for a moment before sitting beside me, at a respectful distance. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Her presence felt like the final note in a song that had been playing very quietly all along. I turned slightly, just enough to meet her eyes, And she looked back, not searching, not explaining. Just there, present. The air around us shifted, not with tension, but with weight. The kind of weight that lifts when both people agree not to carry it alone anymore. After a few minutes, she looked down at the umbrella and smiled. Not wide, just enough. "You kept it," she said, barely above a whisper. "You returned it," I replied. Silence again. A full, comforting silence. She let her hand rest gently on the bench between us, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel. "I almost didn't," she said after a while. "It sat by my door for 3 months before I could bring myself to leave it." I nodded slowly. "It waited longer than that." A small laugh escaped her lips. Sad, but not regretful. She looked up toward the trees. "I wasn't sure what I was returning it to," she said. I understood. I didn't need to say it. We both sat there, the breeze lifting strands of her hair, the leaves moving in slow circles on the ground. "I've thought about this place more times than I can count," she said, "but I always imagined you wouldn't be here anymore." "Some places keep us longer than we expect," I said. She smiled again, this time a little fuller. "I'm glad it did." And then we sat in silence again, not because there was nothing more to say, but because everything we needed to say had already found its way between us. Not in words, in presence. She came again the following week. Not at the same time, a little later, when the shadows were longer and the park quieter. I had arrived earlier, as I often did, and was halfway through a cup of lukewarm tea from the cafe near the corner when I saw her walking up the path. There was no nod, no greeting, just a soft recognition in the way her shoulders relaxed slightly when she saw me. She sat without asking, and we fell into that silence again. Not awkward, never awkward, just present, like 2 pages in the same book, filled with separate words but held together by the same spine. That day, she brought a small pastry wrapped in wax paper. She unwrapped it carefully and tore off a piece, handing it to me wordlessly. I took it, soft, buttery, faintly sweet. I didn't ask what it was. It didn't matter. We ate slowly, like people with no reason to hurry. After a while, she leaned back, letting her hands rest in her lap, and said, "I always wondered if I had left too abruptly." Her voice was quiet, steady. "You did," I said honestly. Then I added, "But I don't think you meant to." She looked down, folded the paper into a small square. "I was afraid," she said, "of what I might become if I stayed, and of what I might forget if I didn't leave." I didn't try to comfort her. She wasn't asking for that. I just nodded, because I knew what fear like that feels like, and how long it can take to turn around. We sat for nearly an hour, talking sometimes, sitting mostly. The park never asked questions, and so neither did we. Before she stood to leave, she placed something on the bench between us, a small stone, smooth and round, with a faint yellow tint. "Found it by the river last week," she said. It reminded me of something I couldn't name. I picked it up, felt its shake. "It's warm," I said. She smiled. "It was in my coat pocket all day." She didn't say goodbye, just stood, touched the bench gently, and walked down the path without looking back. I sat a while longer, the stone still in my hand, the umbrella beside me like always. And I realized we were building something, not a future, not a past, just a space. A place where time could rest without needing to move forward, where people could arrive when they were ready and leave without explanation. And I thought maybe this is what healing looks like. Not loud, not triumphant, just soft returns. It's been 3 weeks since we last shared the bench. I still go every Tuesday. Not because I expect her, not because I need anything answered, just because it's what I do now. The umbrella, though rarely used, still comes with me. It leans gently against my leg, while I sit and listen to the small sounds of the world, leaves scraping across the gravel, distant footsteps, the breeze pressing through the branches like breath. On the second Tuesday, I found another daffodil, not pressed, this time fresh, tucked gently under the edge of the bench. I didn't take it. I let it stay there, yellow and soft against the grain of the wood, until the wind carried it off later that afternoon. On the third Tuesday, there was nothing, and it felt just as full. Presence doesn't always need proof. I sit longer now, not waiting, just being. Some days I bring a book and forget to read it. Some days I bring nothing and remember more. The silence between us, or what remains of us, has become a kind of place itself. A shared room where time doesn't interrupt, where thoughts are allowed to arrive in their own time. I no longer need to ask why she came back, or why she left again. The umbrella is returned, the story revisited, and yet something in me knows it isn't finished. Not in the way stories end, just in the way they rest. Sometimes I imagine her walking past from a distance, not stopping, just smiling, knowing I'm still there. And sometimes I imagine myself not going, and I wonder if she'll ever sit there alone again, remembering a man with a quiet voice and a borrowed umbrella. Either way, it doesn't feel like loss. It feels like rhythm, like seasons, like the way the light changes on the trees each week, subtly but surely. Before I leave each Tuesday, I touch the bench lightly with one hand, not to say goodbye, just to say I was here, still.